Good evening. Welcome to another episode of A Proverb a Day Keeps the Enemy Away. Today's meditation is from Proverbs chapter 7. In this chapter, the writer warns the readers to stay away from the worldly desires or the wicked desires of the world. This chapter comes up with an example of how a foolish man was swept into the desires of his fleshly life, ran away from God's presence, and got ensnared into the trap of a woman. Few things are as terrifying as being swept up by a riptide or a strong current or a storm. Before you realize what's happening, you are out of control at the mercy of the ocean current. If you are fortunate enough to be rescued, expect to be badly shaken and possibly injured. Riptides are dangerous. They are also completely avoidable. How? At beaches where riptides happen frequently, signboards warn swimmers and surfers not to venture into certain areas. Meteorologists can predict weather conditions that create strong currents or storm and advise us about when and where swimming could be dangerous. Temptation often comes at us like a riptide. We are swimming along just fine when all of a sudden something tugs us in another direction. We are swimming hard, but we are getting nowhere. Thankfully, the Bible provides us with warning signs and instructions on how to avoid the pain and destruction of giving to sin. The same way a meteorologist understands the weather, God is the expert on sin and human conditions. He made us, and one of the best ways to protect ourselves from temptation is to immerse ourselves in the truth of His Word. A high regard for Scripture is the best protection against sin. That's the warning a father gives his son in Proverbs chapter 7. When he says to love wisdom like a sister and make insight a beloved member of the family in verse 4. We can choose to ignore warning signs and make excuses, or we can steer clear of temptation entirely. Learning by experience is effective but often painful. Wouldn't you rather stay out of water, out of scripture-based empowerment, rather than being driven by the crippling fear of past experiences? The first 5 verses of this chapter reminds the reader, you and me, of how important godly wisdom is and how it should be heeded by describing a scene of a simple young man, not led by any wisdom, just by his own fleshly desires, giving up to the enticement of a harlot. This harlot enticed this foolish man, who was possibly in a place he had no business of being near. She seduced him, as we read in verse 10, and there a woman met him with the attire of a harlot and a crafty heart, and made him feel she was religious. In verse 14, I have peace offerings with me. Today I have paid my vows. And thus more trustworthy and believable, she lied that he was the one she was looking for. In verse 15, so I came out to meet you diligently to seek your face, and I have found you. His limited morals were discarded, and he was led as an ox goeth to the slaughter. He forgot all he had ever learned and was ruined by this temptation, or ruined by giving up for this temptation. This story of this young man's falling for temptation pictures how we all can be snared, both men and women. It may not be the allurement of a harlot that gets one far from God's heeding, protecting commandments. The alluring desire to fit in with friends or neighbors or peers may lower your standards and provoke you to do things that are beyond the biblical wisdom. Many are seduced by the desire to have wealth. Many are seduced by the desires to have pride. Others are seduced by pornography, covetousness, drugs, alcohol, power, and so on. The temptations all face is unlimited and is different for each person. All wisdom and morality may be laid aside by many as they are ensnared by temptations. They will find themselves doing something that they never imagined they would ever be doing or be indulged in. Temptation can lead to sin, and sin can take one further than ever thought possible. This chapter started out warning the reader to hear, follow, and not to deviate from God's commandments. The biblical commands are not designed to rob anyone of fun. They are guidelines and protections to keep you and me from great regrets and ruin. Be wise. Let the Lord and His truths guide you. Let me conclude by reading verse 24 until verse 27. Now therefore, listen to me, my children. Pay attention to the words of my mouth. Do not let your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths, for she has cast down many wounded, and all who were slain by her were strong men. Her house is the way to hell, descending to the chambers of death. Wisdom is the real understanding of God and His ways for us to live in this wicked world. It's man's only shield in the battle of life. May God help you and me to fight this battle of temptation and overcome temptation to be successful warriors in His kingdom. May God bless us with these words. Thank you.
Praise the Lord. Proverbs 7. My son, keep my words and treasure my commands within you. Keep my commands and live, and my law as the apple of your eye. Bind them on your fingers, write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call understanding your nearest kin, that they may keep you from the immoral woman, from the seductress who flatters with her words. For at the widow of my house I looked through my lattice, and saw among the simple I perceived among the youths a young man devoid of understanding, passing along the street near her corner, and he took the path of her house. In the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night.
Then out came a woman to meet him, dressed in like a prostitute, with a crafty intent. She's unruly and defiant, and her feet never stays at home. Now in the streets, now in the squares, at every corner she lurks. She took hold of him and kissed him. With a brazen face, she said, Today I fulfilled my vows. I have food from my fellowship offering at home. So I came out to meet you. I have looked for you and found you. I've covered my bed with colored linens from Egypt. I've perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let's drink deeply of love till morning. Let's enjoy ourselves with love.
My husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He took his purse filled with money and will not be home till full moon. With persuasive words, she led him astray. She secured him with her smooth talk. All at once, he followed her like an ox going to the slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose, till an arrow pierced his liver, like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her path. Many of the victims she has has brought down, has slain a mighty throne. Her house is a highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death.